Look closely at this scene. A meticulously crafted setting for an ambush disguised as a reunion. The palace gates opened that evening, not to welcome a lost son home, but to usher in the final, definitive reckoning. They sold the world a narrative of a tired father, King Charles, reaching out to his estranged son, Harry, offering a final chance for family healing. They were lying. This was not an act of grace. It was a dynastic surgical strike, coldly designed to ensure that the sacred line of succession remained untainted, no matter the human cost. This small, softly lit gathering room was not a place of warmth, but a courtroom where Harry was the unknowing defendant, about to be sentenced by his own blood. The title Charles strips Archie and Lilibet's titles in Vengeful family Showdown was the chilling headline of the night. A truth too monstrous for the public to imagine, but one the royal family was about to make a horrific reality. The air inside was thick, stifled by a silence so profound that even the children, Archie and Lilibet, sensed the impending storm and grew still. King Charles began to speak, his voice measured, low, yet every syllable carried the weight of historical finality. He spoke not of health, nor of personal regrets, but of integrity, legacy, and the sacred duty to the crown. He declared that before history could be incorrectly written, before he left this world with a secret that would compromise the very foundations of the monarchy, the absolute truth must be spoken. Charles's gaze finally, excruciatingly, locked onto Harry. And then, the words were released, unprepared, unsoftened, utterly brutal. He stated, in no uncertain terms, "Recent and undeniable DNA tests have conclusively shown that Archie and Lilibet are not biologically related to you." The room collapsed into a vacuum of silence. Harry felt the words land like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Beside him, Meghan went instantly white, her hand slipping away from his, a chilling, silent admission of guilt. Charles, relentless in his cruel duty, continued, adding layer upon layer to the nightmare. Their DNA profile matches a man from Meghan's past, her first husband, Trevor. Meghan gasped, hand flying to her mouth, tears flooding her eyes, but still, no denial escaped her lips. Harry turned to her, his world tilting, desperate for an outburst of shock, a furious denial, anything to shatter this grotesque illusion. Yet, all he saw was raw, indisputable guilt. The shock gave way to a staggering rage. His mind raced, desperately trying to map the hidden timelines, the unexplained trips, the hushed phone calls. Had he been so blinded by love that he missed every sign? Then, the final sharp twist of the knife. He looked across the room at William. His brother's face was a mask of cold, chiseled stone. He had known. Harry could see the terrible, months-long complicity etched into his elder brother's control. William, who had stood as his best man, who had watched him raise these two children, had chosen the line over the man he called brother. The betrayal was total, absolute. It came not only from his wife, but from his father and his brother, the two men who were supposed to be his protectors. King Charles, in his ruthless pursuit of an unblemished royal record, had chosen the most public, most devastating way to reveal the truth, ensuring Harry was left with nothing, no trust, no honor, and no undisputed claim to the children he adored. This was not a climax. This was merely the overture to the complete and utter destruction of the Duke of Sussex. The drawing room was no longer just a meeting place. It was a sterile, silent chamber of execution. Harry stood rigid, the initial shock of the DNA revelation now crystallizing into a singular, devastating fury directed straight at William. He stared across the expanse of the Persian rug, meeting his brother's unnervingly calm gaze. The answer was clear, brutally obvious. William knew. His older brother had possessed this grotesque, history-altering secret for weeks, maybe months. The knowledge of Meghan's past, the doubt over the children's paternity, and he had chosen silence. A silence far more treacherous than any outright lie. Harry's voice was strained, not by tears, but by the sheer, contained violence of his rage. He didn't ask a question. He delivered an accusation. "You knew. You knew, and you let me live this lie. You let me raise them. Let me call them mine. For what? To wait for this moment? To have me publicly disgraced in front of the very people who claimed to protect me? William's reply was delivered in a controlled, measured cadence, stripped of all fraternal warmth, a chilling demonstration of his allegiance to duty over blood. He admitted it flatly. Father demanded patience. For the crown, for the stability of the reign, there was no other choice. This record had to be cleared. Harry let out a soundless, bitter laugh. For the crown, always the excuse, always the justification for the calculated abandonment of human decency and familial connection. King Charles raised his hand, a silent but absolute exercise of monarchical power, compelling instant silence. He was no longer a father mediating a feud. He was the sovereign cleansing his house. He iterated that he had to disclose this to ensure the dynastic record was pristine before it was sealed by history. The crown must know the truth. The line of succession must be pure. This final, cold pronouncement pushed Harry past the point of no return. He screamed that they were children. They were 3 and 5 years old. They were innocent of every adult conspiracy in this room. Charles was unmoved, his response clinical and final, crushing all hope. They are not your children, Harry, and they cannot hold positions, titles, or privileges to which they have no biological claim. The cruelty was absolute. Meghan had crumbled, sobbing uncontrollably, her body trembling with guilt and terror. Archie and Lilibet, sensing the shift, watched the adults with wide, frightened eyes. Charles, without delay, announced that the titles of the 2 children were to be immediately nullified. He cited an obscure, archaic decree regarding the requirement of direct paternal lineage within the succession pool. Harry looked at his father, the man who had just systematically destroyed his world, and asked why this could not have been handled in private. Why couldn't Charles have shown mercy? Charles met his son's gaze with weary resolve. He answered, "I have never forgiven you for many things in your life, Harry. I will not begin by allowing a foundational lie to stand as truth." Harry turned to Meghan one last time. She reached for him, but he stepped back, creating an unbridgeable gulf. He asked one simple, emotionless question. "Is it true?" She nodded. She tried to say she wanted to tell him that she had tried many times, but Harry cut her off. His voice was a flat, final verdict. "You did not." The betrayal was complete. Harry walked to Archie and Lilibet. Kneeling to embrace them, they were the only pure things left. He kissed their heads, rose, and stated with chilling clarity that he was leaving. Meghan cried his name, but he silenced her. "Don't say another word," as sighed. He walked toward the door, his steps unsteady, his heart shattered into pieces too small to ever be mended. Harry had already left the room, his world reduced to a single, shattering truth. But for the audience of power Charles, William, and the few trusted courtiers present, the deeper story needed to be told. The DNA test was the verdict, but the narrative behind the deception was the ultimate act of treason against the crown. This was not a moment of weakness. It was a calculated campaign. The seeds of the crisis were sown years ago, in the unfinished business between Meghan and her first husband, Trevor Engelson. While the media painted their divorce as a quiet separation, the reality was a complicated, toxic knot of dependency and unresolved conflict. Our sources, those deep within the palace intelligence network, reveal that even after her engagement to Harry, Meghan maintained secret, carefully encrypted communication channels with Trevor. This wasn't friendship. This was insurance. The crucial evidence, Charles now revealed, lay in a highly sensitive security report detailing a specific, unaccounted gap in Meghan's travel itinerary during the early stages of her first pregnancy. It was a time when the palace machine was preoccupied with the final wedding preparations, a time of intense media focus, ironically providing the perfect smokescreen. She leveraged the palace's staunch demand for privacy as her greatest weapon, using the highly controlled environment to mask a brief, clandestine trip back to the United States. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a choice. The details uncovered by the royal security detail were agonizingly precise. A brief, 3-day period where Meghan claimed to be on a private retreat for meditation and rest, a story swallowed whole by Harry and the press. But the geolocation data, cross-referenced with flight manifests and deep state contacts, placed her squarely in a location near Trevor, just before the conception date. She had used the chaos of the royal wedding preparation to seal her double life, knowing the ensuing fanfare would ensure no one questioned the timing or the lineage of the future heir. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a Trojan horse maneuver. She entered the firm under false pretenses, carrying the possibility of a non-royal heir, an action that compromised the sacred succession from the very beginning. The worst part, the part that drove Charles's vengeance, was the realization that she had not just lied to Harry, but she had knowingly put the integrity of the British monarchy at risk for her own personal, desperate need for security and status. William's cold demeanor suddenly made sense. He hadn't just been waiting. He had been protecting the firm from this very toxic liability. He knew that the only way to safeguard the crown was to wait for Charles to acquire undeniable, irrefutable proof, the DNA test. Harry's betrayal was deeper than any public insult. It was a silent, years-long plot, orchestrated by the woman he trusted implicitly, proving the old adage true: the deadliest secrets are always kept by those closest to you. The crown had spent millions on protection, only to be destabilized from within. The mere knowledge of Meghan's infidelity and the identity of the biological father was not enough for King Charles. The monarchy operates on a foundation of irrefutable proof. Charles understood that Harry, once recovered from the shock, would demand verification, and the world's media would tear apart any less than perfect evidence. The key was the DNA. It had to be obtained covertly, legally sound, and uncontaminated. The operation was code-named Operation Safeguard, executed with the same precision and secrecy reserved for high-level counterterrorism. Charles and William did not trust the royal protection detail. Too many leaks, too much personal loyalty to Harry. Instead, they utilized a tiny, internal team of trusted security experts and a private forensic firm with an ironclad, non-disclosure agreement. The window of opportunity was excruciatingly small. It happened during one of the Sussex family's rare visits to the UK, specifically during their stay at Frogmore Cottage. The palace, under the guise of essential maintenance, had installed state-of-the-art air filtration systems in the children's wing, a seemingly innocuous upgrade meant to counter rumored mold issues. The real purpose of these systems was the extraction of trace biological matter. Archie and Lilibet, like all children, left behind a wealth of DNA on their bedding, toothbrushes, hairbrushes, and most crucially, on the high-grade filters installed in the ventilation unit. The team was able to subtly harvest these filters during a late-night shift change, replacing them with identical, clean units, leaving absolutely no sign of intrusion. The samples were immediately transported under diplomatic immunity to a specialized lab in mainland Europe, a location chosen deliberately outside British jurisdiction to preemptively negate any potential legal challenges from Harry and Meghan about the chain of custody. The most damning detail was the double-blind test commissioned by Charles. A second set of samples was gathered from William and Kate's children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, serving as the uncontestable control group, proving the reliability of the testing facility. The final element of the operation was obtaining Trevor Engelson's DNA. This was achieved through a perfectly executed piece of long-range surveillance. A private security team, tracking Trevor in California, managed to acquire a discarded item containing his genetic material, reportedly a used coffee cup from a film set he was visiting. This seemingly mundane action provided the final, fatal piece of the puzzle. When the final report, sealed and stamped by the European lab, was delivered to Charles, it was not merely a finding, it was a weapon. The document stated, with 999% certainty, that both Archie and Lilibet were biologically related to Trevor Engelson and definitively excluded Harry as the biological father. The silence that followed Charles, reading that report, was the sound of a king making a solemn, vengeful decision. The children had been raised in a gilded cage of lies, and their titles, their very identity, were an insult to the monarchy's historical sanctity. Now that he had the proof, the political and emotional showdown was inevitable. The destruction was not immediate. It came in slow, agonizing waves, each memory now recast in the hideous light of betrayal. Harry was driven away from the palace, not as a prince, but as an empty vessel containing only fury and crushing pain. The royal car passed familiar London landmarks, but his mind was trapped in a labyrinth of doubt. Archie's laughter, Lilibet's hugs, Meghan's whispered vows, all were now tainted by the stench of calculated deception, a perfectly orchestrated performance. He was dropped at a prearranged safe house, a secure, anonymous apartment William had designated for family emergencies, a refuge completely outside Meghan's knowledge or control. The moment the door closed, Harry collapsed, not from exhaustion, but from the dizzying, nauseating realization of the bare truth. The two children he called his own, the two souls he swore to protect from the brutal machinery of the monarchy, were the product of a coldly calculated lie. There were no tears, only a pure, cold rage that compelled him to action. He needed to hear it from another source, a witness, an accomplice. He had to confront Trevor Engelson. Harry knew William had compiled extensive files on Trevor during Operation Safeguard. In a desperate, reckless moment, he accessed the combination lock on a private satchel William had left behind, rifling through the classified documents until he found Trevor's private contact number. It was an insane decision, violating every security principle and royal protocol. But Harry had nothing left to lose. He dialed the number. The phone rang for what seemed like an eternity in the silent room. Finally, a groggy, distinct American voice answered. "Who is this? Why are you calling this late?" Harry took a deep breath, his voice trembling but charged with the authority of the profoundly betrayed. "This is Harry, Prince Harry. We need to talk, Trevor, right now, about Archie and Lilibet." Silence fell heavy on the other end. Trevor clearly couldn't believe who was calling, but the name and the topic instantly put him on high alert. He knew what this meant. Trevor initially stammered denials, claiming Harry had the wrong number, calling it a sick joke. But Harry offered no escape. He played his final card, ruthlessly. "King Charles has the DNA results. I know everything, Trevor. Tell me she coerced you, or tell me you were the active participant." The mention of King Charles and the DNA broke Trevor. The denials stopped. Trevor's voice, now weary and steeped in regret, confessed. It happened when she was in Los Angeles, right before the wedding. It wasn't planned. It was a moment of weakness for both of us. She told me it was the last time she would ever need me. She said she was desperate for a child. Harry's chest tightened. She was desperate for a child. Not his child, but a child to cement her position in the firm, to gain permanent royal insurance. Harry pressed Trevor fiercely, demanding to know why he had remained silent for years. Trevor responded with raw desperation. She said if I ever breathed a word, she would make sure I never worked in Hollywood again. She threatened to ruin me. And I was terrified. I was terrified of the power of the British monarchy through her. The call ended, but the confirmation lingered. Harry had heard the truth from the co-conspirator. Meghan hadn't just deceived him. She had leveraged her new royal power to threaten and coerce another man into silence, using her position as a weapon against the very people she claimed to love. Now, Harry had all the pieces. He was no longer the blind victim. He was a man armed with righteous fury, ready for a fight not just for his dignity, but to ensure Meghan faced the full, destructive cost of her ambition. The moment the door slammed shut on Harry's broken exit, Meghan's sobs ceased. The tears had been a performance, her final, desperate play for sympathy. Now, alone in the ornate but hostile environment of Buckingham Palace, the true Machiavellian strategizing began. She knew the crown had fired the first fatal shot, and she knew exactly how Charles and William operated, in cold, calculated silence. Meghan's survival instinct was stronger than any emotional attachment. Her immediate thought was not reconciliation, but destruction. She understood that her only remaining power lay outside the palace walls, in the court of public opinion, specifically the American media, which had always been her greatest shield. She retrieved her hidden, disposable cell phone, a burner phone, kept specifically for high-risk contact. Her first call was not to a lawyer, but to her most trusted contact in a major U.S. celebrity and political publication, a source cultivated over years of subtle leaks and favors. The phone rang in the dead of night in New York, but the editor on the other end answered immediately, recognizing the specific, encrypted number. Meghan's voice, now devoid of hysteria, was dangerously calm. "The king just committed an act of war against my children," she stated, cutting straight to the headline. She did not confirm the DNA test. She framed the entire confrontation as a racist, tyrannical power grab orchestrated by a king terrified of his own biracial grandchildren. Her strategic leak was brilliant and twisted. She claimed the palace had been holding the children's titles hostage for months, demanding Harry sign a punitive, impossible NDA that would silence them forever. When he refused to surrender his voice, Charles retaliated by weaponizing the children's status. She painted Charles not as a man upholding lineage, but as a monstrous figure who had exploited her personal struggles during pregnancy and deployed covert surveillance like a KGB operation to manufacture a crisis aimed at protecting William's unquestioned path to the throne. The most explosive part of her leak was the hint of Charles's own secrets. She suggested that the king's ruthless need for a pure lineage was driven by his own personal history of infidelity and unresolved scandal. If they want to examine the bloodlines, she reportedly told the source, perhaps they should look closer at the king's own paternity questions from the 1,980 seconds. This counterleak was designed to be instantly viral, hitting the U.S. airwaves within hours. It achieved 3 immediate goals. Delegitimize Charles. It painted the king as a vindictive tyrant, eroding the public goodwill gained during his illness. Shift the narrative. It moved the focus away from her infidelity, the DNA, and onto the palace's alleged cruelty and racism. Control Harry. It boxed Harry into a corner. If he spoke out against her claim, he would appear to be siding with the family that had just betrayed him, thus forcing his silence and securing her control over the public divorce narrative. Meghan knew that by dawn, the transatlantic media storm would erupt, forcing Charles and William to divert their focus from their victory to an unprecedented public relations crisis. The game had just begun, and Meghan had just lit the fuse on the biggest media bomb the royal family had ever faced. Meghan's controlled leak hit the American media with surgical precision at 3 a.m. London time. By the time Charles and William were roused from their sleep by their frantic private secretaries, the initial headlines were already exploding across every major U.S. news outlet. King Charles accused of racism and tyranny in Vengeful title strip, and Palace holds children's titles hostage, Harry forced to choose. The timing was devastating. Meghan had successfully reframed the story from a matter of private marital betrayal to a full-blown institutional crisis fueled by racism and cruelty. She knew the narrative of the vulnerable biracial mother fighting the oppressive white monarchy was an irresistible narrative for the American audience, immediately eroding any goodwill the crown had built. Charles and William convened an emergency summit in the king's private study, the air thick with the smell of defeat. Charles was incandescent with rage. "She has weaponized the race card," he roared, slamming his fist onto the antique desk. "She has accused us of the very things we have spent decades trying to purge from this institution. She has put the monarchy in mortal danger." William, ever the pragmatist, understood the gravity of the international backlash. The accusations of racial malice were a fatal wound to the monarchy's global image, far worse than a simple paternity scandal. "We have to hit back with the absolute truth," William insisted, his voice sharp and steady. "We must release the DNA confirmation immediately. Her entire argument rests on the claim that she is protecting Harry's children. We must show the world they are not his children. That is the only way to neutralize the racism claim and prevent the monarchy from being delegitimized by political correctness." But Charles hesitated. Revealing the DNA results was the nuclear option. It confirmed Meghan's infidelity and Harry's public humiliation on a global, historical scale. It would be a blow from which the monarchy's reputation for stoicism and dignity might never recover. "We cannot destroy Harry completely," Charles murmured, the fatherly instinct briefly surfacing amidst the royal duty. "He is still my son. To publicly declare his children are another man's, that is an eternal scar. We must find another way." William was relentless, cutting through the emotional plea with political urgency. "Father, we have already amputated the limb by stripping the titles. Now we must cauterize the wound. If we do not release the DNA, the world will believe you acted out of sheer racial malice. The monarchy cannot survive that charge." The Prime Minister's office called, demanding a swift resolution to the transatlantic instability. The Commonwealth leaders were already expressing grave concern. Finally, Charles conceded, his face drawn with the terrible cost of the decision. "Very well, we will prepare a statement. The release must be strategic, a cold, factual, medical confirmation of paternity. We will allow the facts to dismantle her narrative." The decision was made. The palace was about to unleash the irrefutable, scientific evidence that would destroy Meghan's victim narrative, but at the cost of forever documenting Harry's most profound betrayal in the annals of history. The statement released by Buckingham Palace was a masterwork of political ruthlessness, devoid of emotion or apology. It was exactly as William had planned, a cold, clinical document confirming the results of the paternity tests, which definitively excluded Prince Harry as the biological father of Archie and Lilibet. There were no names mentioned other than Harry's and the children's, no accusations against Meghan, just the unassailable, scientific truth. The effect was instantaneous and globally catastrophic for Meghan. Her carefully constructed narrative of the racist, tyrannical king collapsed under the weight of the facts. The U.S. media, which had championed her cause hours earlier, now turned on her with brutal efficiency. The headlines shifted from tyranny to "the ultimate royal deception" and Meghan Markle's 2-year lie exposed. She was no longer a victim. She was the architect of the biggest fraud in modern royal history. Back at the palace, Charles and William felt the first surge of relief. They had survived the immediate crisis. However, the victory was short-lived. Across the Atlantic, locked in her Los Angeles residence, Meghan watched her world burn. Her phone, the burner phone she had used for the leak, began to ring, displaying an unlisted number she immediately recognized. Harry's secure line. She answered, her voice dripping with venom. The performance of the distraught mother replaced by the chilling reality of a cornered predator. "You chose them," she hissed, skipping any pleasantries. "You chose the men who publicly humiliated your own children over the woman you swore to protect." Harry's voice, transmitted from the secure safe house in London, was flat, devoid of the love and anger she once relied on. "I chose the truth, Meghan. Something you clearly ran out of years ago. You defrauded a nation and destroyed a family. The titles are gone. It's over." Meghan smiled, a cold, frightening expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's not over, Harry. You think King Charles won with his little DNA announcement? He gave me exactly what I need. Leverage." She then dropped her own truth bomb, a secret she had held for over a decade. A secret that had nothing to do with children or paternity, but everything to do with the Crown's deepest, darkest institutional flaws. "Do you remember that folder you showed me just before we moved to America? The one detailing the settlement William made with the journalist over the affair allegations? The one that explicitly names other senior royals who covered up his indiscretions?" Harry went rigid, miles away in London. That folder, the ultimate palace poison pill, was supposed to be incinerated. It contained evidence of cover-ups, hush money, and the true extent of the royal staff's complicity in protecting William's youthful mistakes. "I kept copies, Harry. Hard copies. And I included detailed notes on how the palace's funds were used to pay off the British media to bury the truth about your own mother's surveillance. I have the receipts, the dates, and the names of the aides Charles threw under the bus to protect the line of succession. The real story about the monarchy's cruelty isn't about Archie's DNA. It's about this folder." Her voice regained its power, now fueled by absolute confidence. "Tell your father and William. Unless they reverse the decision on the titles and publicly apologize for the racism, this entire folder, along with my personal testimony, goes straight to the American television networks. This won't be a scandal. It will be an institutional collapse. The tables had just been violently turned. Charles and William had won the DNA battle, but Meghan had just started the ultimate war for the survival of the British monarchy. The confidential report from Harry, detailing Meghan's blackmail threat, landed on King Charles's desk like a grenade. It was no longer a personal family feud. It was a constitutional crisis orchestrated by a single, ruthless individual. The palace had just won the battle for lineage purity with the DNA reveal, only to be immediately confronted with a threat that could expose the very corruption they sought to hide. Charles and William were paralyzed. They had successfully contained the race and tyranny narrative, but this new threat, the folder, was a direct line to the monarchy's deepest, most sensitive institutional secrets. Meghan wasn't threatening their feelings. She was threatening their funding, their political capital, and the trust of Parliament. The documents detailed the massive hush money payments made to silence a journalist regarding a serious affair, and, far worse, the systemic surveillance and media manipulation used to control the narrative around Princess Diana's death, a truth that could ignite a revolutionary public backlash. "We have won the war on the children, but we are about to lose the monarchy itself," Charles stated, his voice heavy with despair. "If she releases those documents, the media won't care about Archie's DNA. They will care about the deceit we perpetuated for decades. The Commonwealth will fracture." William was white-knuckled, his cold pragmatism struggling against a rising tide of panic. "We cannot apologize, and we cannot reverse the decision on the titles. That sets a precedent that the monarchy can be blackmailed by an outsider. It validates her entire claim." But the choice was brutally simple. Save the titles of 2 children who were not Harry's, or save the 1,000-year-old institution. After hours of frantic consultation with senior aides and the Prime Minister's private secretary, a compromise, both shocking and politically necessary, was hammered out. It was a deal designed to neutralize Meghan's leverage without appearing to give in to her blackmail. The compromise involved a strategic, yet cruel, sacrifice of the past to save the future. No title reversal. Archie and Lilibet would remain stripped of their official HRH status and prince-princess titles, upholding the crown's authority on lineage. A public olive branch. King Charles would release an unprecedented, deeply personal public statement, apologizing specifically to Harry for the decades of institutional neglect and failure to protect his privacy, a veiled reference to Diana's treatment, and the palace's previous cover-ups, the folder's contents. This apology would be framed as a father's regret, not a king's submission. The financial weapon, the most critical concession. The children, despite losing their titles, would be granted a private, irrevocable financial trust fund, massive, tax-free, and legally shielded, equal to the full financial benefit they would have received as titled royals. This was the ultimate poison pill. This financial package was designed to fulfill Meghan's core desire, money and security for the children, while maintaining the crown's narrative control, no titles. More importantly, the funds were tied directly to a legally binding agreement. Meghan was required to surrender all copies of the sensitive folder, along with her signed testimony, to the palace's secure archives. If she breached the NDA and released the documents later, the trust fund would be immediately dissolved, leaving the children with nothing. The move was brilliant. Charles had bought the monarchy's survival by sacrificing the final shred of his relationship with Harry, using the very children he claimed to be protecting as the leverage to silence their mother. The final act of the royal showdown was not played out in public, but in a cold, sterile agreement signed across continents. Meghan, the strategic predator, accepted the compromise. The financial trust fund for Archie and Lilibet, massive, untouchable, and guaranteed, was the ultimate prize she had sought all along. The surrender of the folder and the signing of the lifetime NDA was merely the price of her insurance policy. Meghan's final interaction with the palace was a ruthless negotiation conducted through lawyers. When the documents were signed, she offered a single, icy comment to the royal liaison. Tell the king he saved his throne by sacrificing his son's dignity. The cost was high, but the crown survived. I got what I needed. There was no remorse, only calculation. She had lost the titles, but she had secured the future wealth of her children outside the monarchy's control, a victory by attrition. For Harry, the deal was the final, devastating betrayal. He was informed of the compromise by William, who delivered the news with the practiced coldness of a functionary. Harry understood the political necessity that the monarchy's survival outweighed his personal humiliation, but the emotional cost was absolute. You didn't save the monarchy, William, Harry told him over the secure line, his voice hollow. You just paid off the mobster who burned down my house. You've sealed the truth about Dad and Diana, but you've permanently exiled me, financially and emotionally. In it a doer, Harry had been forced to witness two truths: his wife's profound deception and his family's utter ruthlessness. The royal apology Charles offered, framed as regret for institutional neglect, was a bitter pill. Harry knew it wasn't a genuine fatherly regret. It was a cheap payment to keep Meghan silent, using the memory of his own mother, Diana, as the emotional shield. The final scene took place in the desolate safe house. Harry packed a single bag. He left behind the clothes he'd worn to the palace, symbolically shedding the last remnants of his royal life. He made one last call to Meghan, not to argue, but for closure. I'm leaving this place, he stated. I will always protect the children, but you and I are done. You leveraged my love, my identity, and my family's secrets for money. You are no longer my wife. You are the reason I no longer have a home. It's time, Seven. Meghan, still surrounded by her team in Los Angeles, offered no tears or apologies. We both got what we wanted, Harry. Freedom. You just didn't realize the price until now. I'll see you in California. The coldness was definitive. Harry's exit from the safe house was shrouded in secrecy. He returned to the U.S., but not to Meghan. He retreated into a self-imposed exile, the titles of his children gone, his marriage broken, and his family relationships severed beyond repair. The vengeful showdown had stripped Archie and Lilibet of their status, but it had stripped Harry of his entire world. The monarchy survived. Charles and William moved forward, slightly scarred, but politically intact, the truth of their secrets locked away by gold and legal threats. But the final cost was borne by the invisible scars on Harry's soul, the Duke of Sussex, left alone, a man without a wife, without titles, and now, finally, without illusion.